Michael Harrison lay quietly on the hotel bed in his room in Seattle, trying to sleep. He had just attempted to make his late-night phone call to Elizabeth, his wife of over 23 years. He was halfway through another exhausting business trip. The older he got, the harder it became to distinguish when one trip ended and another began, not to mention questioning their usefulness. It was all just a blur. These trips were beginning to take their toll on him. He spent more than half his life on the road, devoting much of his time to travel during almost 20 of his 23 years of marriage. Michael was definitely looking forward to retirement. He hoped that in 6 or 7 years, he and Beth would be able to enjoy the lifestyle they had worked so hard to achieve throughout their lives together. Michael wasn't bothered by the work itself. He loved his job as regional sales director for Denver Medical Solutions and was proud of the accomplishments of his team. He liked to tell people that as a sales director, he didn't actually do any real selling. He simply traveled, talked to people who were working, and tried to remove obstacles from their path to success. Of course, this was all to generate revenue for the company. The fact that he was very well compensated for his efforts always surprised him to some extent. He didn't consider himself smarter or more persistent than most, but he had learned the secret a long time ago. Far more people feared success than failure. For many reasons, but overall it came down to fear. His job was simply to make people less afraid. Michael usually fell asleep immediately after an evening telephone conversation with his wife. He found it soothing to listen to Beth's voice. This made it easy to fall asleep, but that hadn't been the case lately. He mulled over the smallest thoughts and suspicions over and over in his head, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. These thoughts raced through his head again. Michael was not a naturally suspicious person, but over the past few months he had become increasingly concerned that Beth was having an affair. On the surface, Michael told himself it was impossible, but too many nagging fears led him to believe that he would have to do something to confirm or disprove his suspicions. He definitely didn't have smoking gun evidence, but it was the little things that had accumulated, and then one significant event last week. When their daughter Jessica left for college last fall, Beth became very quiet and depressed. Michael thought it was just normal empty nest syndrome that parents often experience when their children leave home. After all, although he would never admit it, he too was depressed when Jessica left home. When he talked to Beth about it, she agreed that she was very sad that their daughter was gone from their daily lives. It left a big hole in her world. Beth's depression worsened. It even got to the point where her boss at Mountain View Construction had to sit down with her to discuss her deteriorating performance. It didn't help much. Then, about 4 months ago, almost as if she had flipped a switch, his wife returned. She became cheerful, playful, and her work performance was restored. Even their intimate life became more vibrant again. He teased her about it good-naturedly. She told him she just wanted to make sure she was taking care of the most important person in her life. They started spending weekends together 2 or 3 times a month, and both enjoyed it immensely. She also began to dress better. It wasn't provocative at all, just more professional. As an office manager for a large construction company, appearance was important, so again, the way she dressed in itself meant little. It was another work-related change that really increased his anxiety levels. Beth always took pride in the work she did and enjoyed discussing all aspects of her job with Michael. But then she suddenly stopped. She hadn't mentioned work in the last few months, other than to say she had to stay late because of a new project her company had acquired. Missed phone calls and other discrepancies followed. For example, a month ago Michael returned home early from a business trip and decided to stop by her office to see if they could go to lunch. Her assistant, Sarah, apologized to him, saying that he had just missed her since she had left with colleagues a few minutes earlier. He had a strange, unpleasant feeling the entire time he was in the building. Somehow Sarah Mitchell became more formal in her approach to him and had difficulty maintaining eye contact. He had known Sarah for years, and she always called him Michael, but that day it was Mr. Harrison. Michael almost said something but decided against it. As he walked out of Beth's office building, He could have sworn that several people were looking at him. Michael checked his zipper to make sure it wasn't open, but perhaps he was simply becoming paranoid in his old age. That night at home, he asked Beth about her day, and all she said was that she had so much work to do that she didn't leave her desk. Interesting. He also noticed that she began changing clothes and showering at unusual times. He realized that she only did this on long working days. Perhaps she always did this, but he hadn't noticed before. It wouldn't really be that weird to want to take a shower as soon as you get home after a 12-hour day at work, would it? Then last week, everything came to a head for him. They both got home late from work and were too tired to cook, so they decided to order takeout. Beth's phone was closer to him, so he picked it up to call for delivery, only to find that the phone was locked. After 23 years, you need a password? He asked her about it, and she laughed nervously. She gave him the code, and he made the call. At the dinner table, she voluntarily explained that the guys at work told her she had to password protect her phone because of all the company data on it. Michael agreed it was a good idea and thought nothing more of it at the time. A few nights later, when she was sleeping, he was sure she was fast asleep because she was snoring. Beth always denied this, saying that ladies don't snore, they just breathe deeply. So while she was breathing deeply, he stood up, took her phone, and entered her password. She had changed it. She had changed her password within 2 days of giving it to him. Seriously? Michael was very proud that in over 23 years of business travel, he had never cheated on his wife. He never even came close to cheating. This was no accident. Early in their marriage, Beth was very jealous when Michael traveled. He knew how worried she was, so he tried to call her every evening while he was away to calm those fears. Over the years, she became more relaxed about his trips, but Michael still always had a personal policy of never getting into risky situations. Sometimes it was dinner and drinks with work groups or clients, but Michael always tried to leave first. If the group went to a club, he declined. When he was alone, his habit when returning to the hotel after work was to stop for one quick drink at the usually empty hotel bar, and then head to his room, where he would order room service and read a book or catch up on work. Then he made his call home. Michael even told Beth about how he did this years ago when she was having a hard time with his absence. He tried to ease her anxiety. It became their inside joke. Beth reminded him not to indulge himself, as she called it, the night before he returned home. She wanted him to be able to fulfill his duties upon arrival. He didn't care if anyone thought he was antisocial or boring. He wasn't going to let himself get into a dangerous situation that might cause anxiety or increase her tendency toward jealousy. On the one hand, Michael was ashamed to even have these doubts, but again that night, his call to their home phone went to the answering machine. When he called her cell phone, it went to voicemail. He sighed and disconnected without leaving a message. If this followed a familiar pattern that had become increasingly common, he would receive one of several excuses. "Oh dear, sorry, I fell asleep early. When I woke up, it was too late to call given the time difference." Or, "I was in the shower and didn't hear the phone." Or, "I was in the basement doing laundry." Then there was his favorite. "I was late at work and lost track of time. I'm really sorry." At least he hadn't yet received the universal excuse of, "Oh, I went out for drinks with the gang from work." He felt terrible that he had lost trust in her. He knew that a marriage without trust was in serious danger. So as he lay with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling, wondering what to do, noises from the room directly above him caught his attention. "Oh great," he thought. "The hotel isn't even half full, and I'll have someone above me to bother me all night." Such were the dangers of business travel. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and tried unsuccessfully to block out the noise and fall asleep. Lying there, he heard a woman in the room above. The sounds began, the characteristic sounds. The intimate activity upstairs continued for hours. Damn, this was not an act of love. This was pure passion. There could be no doubt about what was happening in that room. He laughed to himself. He dozed, waking up from time to time throughout the night. Finally, around 4 o'clock in the morning, he heard someone leave. The closing door and the dead silence of the night had a unique sound that everyone who travels knows. However, he was able to sleep for a few hours. His alarm clock woke him up as planned. Michael was alert as he shaved in the bathroom. He could hear someone moving around in the same room upstairs, going through their morning routine. He made a mental note to never stay at that hotel again. The walls were too thin. Out of curiosity, he tried to time his departure to meet someone in the corridor or in the elevator. He heard the door upstairs slam shut. He knew it was a woman because he could clearly hear the sound of her shoes clicking on the floor in time with her steps as she approached the elevator from above. When Michael approached the elevator, he paused for a moment before pressing the call button. He heard the elevator pass him on the way up. It stopped on the floor above. He quickly pressed the call button and waited. Luckily, the elevator immediately began to descend and stopped on his floor. When he entered, there was only one person there. He got lucky. "Good morning," he offered. The woman standing in front of him was about his age. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her, to be honest. She looked like every other businesswoman he often encountered. She was quite tall. In heels, she almost reached his 6 feet. She was well built. He estimated about 150 well-proportioned pounds. Michael liked curvy women. She was neatly dressed in a traditional business suit. She wore a dark jacket with a white blouse that showed a reasonable amount of cleavage for a work environment. The woman wore a simple string of pearls around her neck. She wore a pencil skirt that went just above her knees and stockings. Michael wondered if they were pantyhose or thigh-high stockings. He preferred stockings with a garter belt. His wife often indulged his fantasies in this area. The woman had her dark hair pulled back tightly into a bun. She wore dark-framed glasses that made her brown eyes appear larger. Michael always thought women with glasses were very attractive. He constantly encouraged Beth to get her eyes checked, hoping that one day she would need glasses. So far, to no avail. He definitely had a thing for that particular look. Michael couldn't help himself. As the elevator began its descent to the lobby just a few floors below, he smiled friendly and spoke. "Good morning. You look tired." She responded with a smile of her own. "I had a rough night." "Yes, I heard. I'm sorry about that." "Don't apologize. You saved me $9 on my hotel bill, and it was better than any movie they offered." "I'll try to be quieter tonight," she said jokingly. "Please don't change a thing. Maybe I could save another $9. They laughed together as the elevator reached the lobby. They got out, wished each other a good day, and went about their business. Michael had a busy day, so all his thoughts about his meeting with this intriguing lady disappeared. Luckily, he didn't have time to worry about Beth either. Overall, Michael had a very productive day. He was tired but happy with his work when he returned to the hotel around 6 p.m. He decided to stop at the lobby bar to have his usual scotch before heading to his room. He headed straight to the bar. Although he preferred to sit in a booth in the back, he was pretty sure there wouldn't be a bartender waiting tables on a quiet weekday evening. The place was almost empty. The only sound was the wheels of the all-purpose rolling suitcases owned by nearly 100% of traveling businessmen rolling across the lobby tiles as their owners came and went seemingly endlessly. It was almost a game among the crowd of business travelers to see how big a bag they could manage and then stuff it into the overhead bin for the flight home. Michael was going against the flow. He always checked his luggage. Yes, it cost him a few minutes, but it saved a lot of hassle and kept his blood pressure under control. Plus, he always enjoyed watching the show on board as the next person tried to stuff their bag into a cramped space while the flight attendant rolled her eyes. Knowing that the bag would end up in the cargo hold anyway, it was always the last one to be unloaded. Hey, when you're a frequent traveler, you find your joys everywhere. The bartender was busy with nothing but watching the local news, so it took a few minutes to get her attention. When he finally got her attention, it still took her a while to tear herself away from whatever tragedy the hosts were chattering about. He ordered his usual Johnny Walker White Label on the rocks, and sat on the bar stool to await his drink. He figured it would take a while. Michael wasn't used to being called a voyeur, but he assumed it was directed at him because there were no other people in the room. Well, except for the bartender, and she looked more like someone's grandmother than a pervert. He turned around and looked around the dimly lit room. The woman from the elevator sat in a corner booth in the background. Not a real resemblance to anyone famous, of course, but that woman from the elevator who, in this light, really had an attractive professional appearance. Having nothing better to do, he decided to join her. He wanted to tell the bartender about this, but she had her back to him, so he shrugged and headed toward the booth. The first thing he noticed about her, besides the fact that she was dressed the same as in the morning, was the drink in her hand. It was a glass with ice and a couple of fingers of amber liquid. This wasn't a glass of wine or some exotic cocktail with little plastic umbrellas sticking out of it. He thought it was probably bourbon, neat, very unusual. "Yeah, it's Maker's Mark," she said, noticing his interest. "Michael Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "Is this where we exchange business cards?" She smiled as she sat down. "Catherine Coleman. And no, I won't give you my business card because you'll probably just use it to start stalking me." They both laughed politely. There was an immediate feeling of connection between them, not in a romantic sense, but rather a shared experience hard-earned by spending countless nights away from home. It was the type of connection that could develop into a good friendship over time. They engaged in casual conversation, asking each other about their jobs and travel schedules for a few minutes while they waited for Michael's drink to arrive. After an agonizing 10 minutes, it finally did. Despite his disappointment, he still left a generous tip for the bartender. Her indifference, not to mention how small she poured it for him, was not unusual in his experience. Hell, she worked there and he worked elsewhere and both wanted to be somewhere else, almost anywhere else. Michael had always loved studying people, and as he talked, he watched how Catherine handled her drink. She was one of those people who always smelled alcohol before drinking it. This helped her enjoy the full flavor of the drink. She didn't down it in one gulp, trying to drown out the pain. She wanted to enjoy the chosen drink. He guessed that most of the time she drank no more than 2 drinks at a time. Michael knew that in some circles he was committing the cardinal sin of filling his scotch glass with ice, but the hell with it. He enjoyed stirring it endlessly with a plastic straw and then chewing on one end of the stick. The advantage of ice in his drink was that he could still enjoy the taste of the alcohol after the amber liquid was gone. He continued to crunch the ice until it disappeared completely. If he got desperate, he could chew the stick to extract the last bit of flavor. While Michael was observing her drinking habits, he noticed that Catherine was wearing a wedding ring. This upset him. A distressed expression appeared on his face, reminding him of all his insecurities about Beth. Catherine noticed a change in his mood. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, it's just..." He had an inspiration. "Do you mind if I ask you some very personal questions?" There was a sparkle in Catherine's eyes. "Yeah, sure. Good friends can ask personal questions. I mean, after spending last night listening to you, I guess that makes us pretty good friends, doesn't it?" They both laughed so loudly that the bartender even turned away from the TV to look in their direction for a moment. When he calmed down, he had a moment of indecision. He wasn't sure if he should end the evening right then and there or continue. He decided to continue. "Do you love your husband? And why do you do this?" Catherine's mind worked quickly. She prided herself on her ability to read people. She was the chief compliance inspector for regulatory standards at a large healthcare technology company. She was used to people trying to deceive her. When she first started, they tried to intimidate her, but they soon realized that she was not to be trifled with. When 95% of a multi-billion-dollar company's business comes from federal healthcare contracts, compliance with regulatory standards is no small matter. This could influence the choice of contracts. Now people stayed away from her if they wanted to keep their jobs. Catherine studied Michael's face. She was sure he wasn't trying to get her into bed. He also was not making moral accusations. He asked the question with some confusion but mostly with sadness. She thought she knew what really interested him. Wow. Let's start with the easy questions, huh? She was a little surprised by his straightforwardness, but when she later found out he worked in medical equipment sales, it made sense. He didn't work in healthcare compliance, but worked in technical sales. The concept of dealing with regulations was the same. She was a thoughtful person, so she took time to formulate her answer. Yes, Michael, I love my husband. Do I think we are soulmates destined to be united as the only people in the whole world made for each other? No. We are a good team and we raised good kids together. She got a little distracted. I hear a lot about people who feel an instant attraction and think they have found their soulmate, when in fact it's just chemistry and pheromones. She laughed. Love comes later. At this point, she lightly tapped her phone and brought up the photo file. She quickly flipped to the family album and spoke in detail about her husband and 3 teenage children. It was clear that she cared deeply for her entire family, including her husband. This only added to Michael's confusion. She put the phone away. As for why I'm doing this, it's a little more complicated. If I promise to tell you everything, may I ask why you want to know? She thought she already knew the answer, but she wanted him to say it himself. She needed him to be involved in the conversation. I think my wife Beth, or Elizabeth actually, is cheating on me. The problem is that, well, I know that she loves me. At least she definitely did before. So why? There it was said. I listened to you talk about your family, and in 15 minutes I can tell that you love them all. Why risk it all? Wow! Catherine was caught off guard. Not so much by the words, but by the depth of the conversation she knew still had to be had. Catherine was heading home in the morning, so she planned to get a good night's sleep. Looks like that won't happen. Michael was clearly a man in pain. Pain she didn't know if her words would help him or hurt him further. But he deserved the truth from her. She already felt a kinship with him. I see what I do when I'm away as something I need. Sounds cliché, but I feel like it makes me a better wife and mother when I get home. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I really enjoy being a mother and a wife. However, when I'm at home, sometimes I feel like that's all I am. I also need to feel like my own person, an independent woman in control of my thoughts and body. She paused to think about how else to explain it. Don't get me wrong. I know it's wrong and it might hurt, but on a cost-benefit basis, it's worth the risk for the greater good. Do you understand that? Yeah. I think I see where you're coming from. But is the potential price you might pay really worth the risk? So if your husband finds out, do you think he'll divorce you? That's a really good question. I would hope not, because I don't want to lose my family. But knowing him as I do, yes, I think he would divorce me. Her eyes became wet, and she had to look away to keep the tears from flowing. But I'm very careful about what I do. For example, I would never sleep with you. Don't get me wrong. I know you're not harassing me. How do you decide? Well, Michael, first of all, you're married. I don't sleep with married men, period. I might risk my marriage, but not someone else's. I can't say that I've never slept with a married man because some people hide it very well, but I am quite good at finding out a man's marital status. Pale skin where a ring sits is an obvious sign, but if you talk to a man long enough about general topics, sooner or later, if he is married, he will say, my wife. When he says that, it's all over for me. Michael nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. If they are unmarried but new to business travel, they will brag to their friends. This is something I cannot allow. Also, I never sleep with men under 35 or so. I travel to 4 different cities, and I have a couple of male friends in each that I can rely on when needed. And I never, ever cheat on my husband when I'm at home. At home, I don't even flirt with men under any circumstances. And lastly, I never sleep with anyone the night before coming home. I wouldn't do that to my husband. I know it sounds funny, but I respect him too much. Wow, that explains a lot. Catherine, let me ask you something else. If your husband confronted you when you got home from a trip, not with photos and a private investigator's report, but just with his suspicions. Would you lie to him? Catherine took a slow breath and collected her thoughts. It was a good thing the lounge was quiet because she barely whispered her answer. No, I wouldn't lie to him. For me, that would be worse than cheating. Am I crazy? No, Catherine, you're not crazy. But you're complicated. She laughed like a little girl, and then she became thoughtful. I never thought about it like that, but I guess it really is difficult. Do you ever plan to tell him? Say when you're old and gray and spending your last days in a nursing home. No, Michael. I won't lie, but I will take this with me to the grave. Isn't this worse? I can't imagine a deeper pain or greater disrespect a wife could show. His question remained unanswered. My situation may be different from yours, Michael. Like I said, I never considered Robert to be my soulmate. He's just someone I really like, and I chose him to start a family with. However, I would definitely be disappointed if I couldn't live the rest of my life with him. Are you sure he feels the same way about you? Have you ever asked him why he married you? This was another unanswered question. They both fell silent for a while, just enjoying their drinks. Michael broke the silence by crushing an ice cube in his mouth. Catherine looked at him with mock disgust. Ice cubes, right? She just shook her head sadly. Now it was Michael's turn to be lost in thought for a moment. I could never cheat on Beth. Guess it's just not in my genes. He continued to talk about his life with Beth and Jessica. He emphasized how much he enjoyed being a father. You know, Catherine, I spent all of 19 years raising my daughter, trying to be a good example for her. It's one thing to talk, but I feel the best lesson is to do. He could see that it affected her. Sorry, Catherine. I didn't mean to sound judgmental. It's weird, but somehow I'd be worse off disappointing Jessica than Beth. Does that make sense to you? Yes, that makes sense, Michael. I'm thinking about that aspect. I wonder what I would say if, in 10 years or so, my married daughter came to me and said she was thinking about cheating. What would I advise her if she asked me for advice? Oh yeah, I think about that a lot. Catherine began to cry quietly. Maybe you should stop. It's not too late. You may be right, but I have no regrets. Like most difficult things in life, it's not black and white. At least in my case, it's not. She seemed melancholy. I don't think I'm explaining it to you very well. Sorry I'm being so pushy, Catherine. I'm just trying to figure it out, and you're doing a great job of explaining it. You're really helping me a lot. Why do you think Beth would cheat on me? She pulled herself together. First of all, you don't know for sure if she's cheating on you. But if she's doing it, I suspect it's for some of the same reasons I do it. She just doesn't have the luxury of covering it up with travel. Based on what you told me about her and your marriage, my guess is that if she's cheating, it's with just one person. She immediately raised her hand to stop him, anticipating what he would say. That's not a knock on you as Beth's husband. You can't give her what she needs in this case. My guess is that she's with a man who allows her to just be herself. Like I said, when she's with him, as in my case, she is completely a woman with no responsibility to anyone else. But when she is with you, no matter what happens, she is a mother or a wife first. I know it's another cliché, Michael, but this really isn't about you. I'm not sure I agree. If it's not about me, why am I suffering so much? I don't see how it wouldn't be. Fair enough, Michael. But the more important question is, if she does cheat, can you live with it? Would Robert? She just shook her head in denial and continued. Well, Michael, then I guess sooner or later you'll have to discuss this with her. I hope I never have to be in your situation. It's too late. You don't have to believe it, but I do. I miss my family. I need to go to bed to catch an early flight. I can't wait to get home. Sometimes this life we lead gets so boring. Anyway, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thought-provoking. She smiled her mischievous smile again. I promise I'll be quiet tonight. I'll be alone. She pouted with sad lips. Don't turn on the full volume of the movie tonight. Okay? I don't want you to disturb my sleep. Goodbye, Michael. She looked at him with sympathy and sincere hope that she would never have to face his dilemma. As she left, Michael thought absently that Catherine looked as good leaving as she had when she arrived. He still didn't know what he would do about Beth, but now he had a better idea of what might be going on in her head. At least he had a couple more days away from home, so he had time to think about it. On his flight home, Michael usually chose a window seat. He spent most of the 3-hour flight looking at the terrain as it passed by. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice that they hadn't experienced any turbulence while crossing the Rocky Mountains. When he saw Denver below, it dawned on him, wow, this was a first. When he first started traveling for work, he noticed that seasoned travelers heading east or west would put away their laptops and fasten their seatbelts as they approached the Rockies. It only took him a couple of trips to understand why. On his way home from the airport, Michael was having an internal debate with himself. He wasn't sure if he should hire a detective to find out if Beth was cheating on him. Part of him wanted to just ignore it all, but in the end, he decided to just confront her with his suspicions. He wouldn't have the time, money, or energy to spend on conducting an investigation. He couldn't live with uncertainty, and he definitely wasn't capable of just burying his head in the sand. So he decided it was time to talk to her. That's the most offensive thing you've ever said to me. I'm not going to answer that question. How dare you? How could you even ask me that? She jumped up from the table and headed to the kitchen, holding her half-eaten dinner in her hands. You didn't say no, did you? He said calmly and evenly, despite the anger boiling inside him. He no longer had any doubts. So it's come to this? You're just going to lie to my face? What have I ever done to deserve this from you? He suddenly felt old and very tired. She stopped where she was but didn't turn to him. It seemed like it took forever, but it probably wasn't quite a minute before she spoke quietly. You didn't do anything, Michael. Nothing at all. She still couldn't look at him. Finally, she turned and returned to her seat. She sat silently, looking at Michael. He knew she was deciding whether to lie, tell the truth, or give him a sanitized version. She chose to lie. Michael, honey, you shocked me. I would never have thought that you would even ask me such a thing. Of course I'm not cheating. Beth, please don't lie to me anymore. Can't we just be adults about this? Are you really going to make me hire a private investigator and set up cameras and all the other investigative stuff? I can't believe you're going to make me do this. She was silent for a long time. What she said next surprised him. Listen, Michael, darling, can't we just leave it? We're so good together now. She asked this in obvious desperation. He shook his head slowly and deliberately. He was silent, staring at her, and waited. Okay, Michael. Yes. I've been seeing someone for about 4 months now. She covered her face with her hands but did not cry. In fact, she seemed surprisingly calm. Michael's mind was in disarray. Although he knew it was true, her final admission shocked him to the core. It was as if he had been hit in the stomach and all the air was knocked out of him. He really didn't know what to say next. He was rarely as confused as he was now. Why did you lie to me, Beth? It wasn't the first thing he planned to say, but under the circumstances, it was all he could think of. Of course I lied to you, Michael. Telling the truth would have hurt, and of course I never meant to hurt you. Would you have acted differently if the situation had been the other way around? No, Beth, I wouldn't lie. Couldn't. I've always considered you my soulmate. It seems like maybe you've always been more important to me than I am to you. This realization saddens me greatly. Will you at least let me explain why? Honestly, if you feel the need to unload, go ahead. But I recently talked to a friend who explained everything to me. I really don't want to know who it was, when it started, or any other details. The fact that you did it is everything that matters to me. This made her think. I think I have to, so we can move on. Michael simply shook his head and raised his hand, waving for her to continue. She then spent 20 minutes explaining herself. Michael was bored and only half listening. After all, he had heard it all before. It wasn't that he didn't believe she was sincere, It just didn't matter to him. He realized after a while that she had finished speaking and was looking at him silently. They were both surprised at how calm they were. It was so civilized that it seemed a little surreal. Beth broke the silence. "What do you think, dear?" What? Sorry, what did you say? About us going to counseling to help us heal our marriage. Were you listening to me? Of course. That's normal, I guess. But I have one more question. If I never found out about this, would you ever tell me? I mean, when we're 80 in the nursing home, remembering our life's ups and downs and preparing for the inevitable approach of the last days of our lives, would you tell me then? He looked at her so carefully she had to evaluate the matter honestly. She didn't lie anymore. He didn't deserve this. No, Michael, I wouldn't tell. It was something I needed for myself, and it would eventually go away. I fully intended to take it to my grave. It would hurt you too much, and there's no way that was connected to you. So why would I say it? Their divorce was finalized 6 months later. Michael sat in yet another nameless, nondescript hotel bar with his signature drink in front of him. It had been almost a year since his divorce was finalized. He recalled that period. It was the most difficult time in his life. Beth did not contest the divorce. What was there to argue about? They lived in a no-fault divorce state. Jessica was an adult. They sold their house and divided everything in half. The biggest blow was finances. Instead of retiring at 55, Michael would have to work until he was 65 to live comfortably. He assumed Beth was in the same boat. He never really talked about his feelings to anyone about that period of his life. The only pleasant memory of that time was his daughter, Jessica. If there was one thing, it was that he and she grew closer after he divorced her mother. He remembered the first call he received from Jessica after he moved out and filed for divorce. "Hey, Dad. Mom told me everything. I'm so sorry about all of this. It's not your fault, honey. Sometimes these things just happen." Michael was preparing for a flurry of attempts to mediate his parents' problems or, worse, choosing sides. But this did not happen at all. "Dad, listen to me. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but I'm about to start. I'm sorry to be so direct with you, but you are my parents. I love you both and will always be grateful for the wonderful childhood you gave me. I couldn't ask for a better mom and dad." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "Your relationship is between you two. I will not interfere in any way. We are all adults, and I'm sure we will find a way to deal with this in the future." She thought for a moment. "I'm planning to spend time with both of you. I expect you to behave accordingly during future family events, of which I am sure there will be many. But the first time one of you speaks ill of the other in my presence or tries to make me gossip about the other, it will be a long time before you see me again. Do we understand each other?" "Absolutely understandable, Jessica. I love you more than life itself. I'm proud of you." Strange. That's exactly the same thing my mom told me an hour ago when I was talking to her about the same thing. She laughed. Even though this conversation took place more than 18 months ago, thinking back on it still brought tears to Michael's eyes. It was the pride of a proud parent. A voice interrupted his nostalgic thoughts. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Michael looked up to see an attractive woman about his age standing beside the bar stool next to his. The hotel bar was nearly empty. There were probably a dozen seats available, but this was the one she wanted. "No, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the seat. She settled in and ordered a glass of wine. Michael went back to his thoughts, but she seemed inclined to talk. "Business or pleasure?" she asked. "Business. You?" "Same. What kind of work brings you to?" She paused, looking around the generic hotel bar. "Where are we again?" "Phoenix," Michael said with a smile. "And I sell medical equipment." "Well, technically I manage people who sell medical equipment." "What about you?" "I'm in corporate training. I travel around teaching people how not to get their companies sued." She laughed. "Exciting stuff." They talked easily for the next hour. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she had been divorced for 3 years. She had 2 adult children and lived in San Diego. She was intelligent, funny, and had an easy laugh. Michael found himself enjoying her company more than he had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. When she mentioned that she was heading back to her room, Michael almost asked if she'd like to have dinner the next evening. Almost. But something held him back. Perhaps the memory of his conversation with Catherine Coleman. Perhaps the image of Beth's face when she'd confessed. Perhaps just the weight of everything that had happened. Instead, he said, "It was really nice meeting you, Jennifer. Have a safe trip home." She looked at him for a moment, as if she were about to say something, then simply smiled. "You too, Michael. Take care of yourself." After she left, Michael sat alone with his drink, thinking about the path that had brought him here. He was 58 years old, divorced, successful in his career but wondering what it all meant. He thought about Jessica, who was now engaged to a good man and planning her wedding. He thought about Beth, who he heard through Jessica was doing well and had been promoted at work. The next few years passed in a blur of work, travel, and the gradual construction of a new life. Michael dated occasionally but never seriously. He bought a condo near downtown Denver with mountain views and learned to cook for one. He developed routines, friendships with neighbors, hobbies he'd never had time for during his marriage. Jessica got married in a beautiful ceremony in Colorado Springs. Both Michael and Beth attended, sitting on opposite sides of the church like diplomatic representatives from warring nations. They were polite, even warm, but careful not to venture into personal territory. At the reception, they managed to have a normal conversation about Jessica's happiness and the beautiful venue, both of them working hard to make the day perfect for their daughter. Michael walked Jessica down the aisle, and during the father-daughter dance, she whispered in his ear, "I'm proud of you, Dad. You've handled everything with such grace." He nearly broke down right there on the dance floor. The grandchildren started arriving 2 years later. First was Michael Jr., named after his grandfather, then Emma, and finally little Thomas. Jessica and her husband David lived close enough that Michael could be an active grandfather, taking the kids on adventures, teaching them to fish, showing up for soccer games and piano recitals. It was at Tommy's christening celebration that everything changed. Michael was approaching his 65th birthday and had announced his intention to retire within the year. The family had gathered at Jessica's house in Colorado Springs for the celebration. A noisy, chaotic, wonderful gathering of aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends. Michael was standing on the back patio, watching his grandchildren play in the yard, when he noticed Beth sitting alone at a picnic table, looking thoughtful. She had aged, of course they all had, but she looked good. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver, and she had developed laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she had found reasons to smile over the years. Something made him walk over to her. Maybe it was the setting, the family celebration, the children playing, the sense of time passing. Maybe it was the realization that they were both alone in a crowd of family. Maybe it was just curiosity about the woman he had shared most of his adult life with. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. Of course not. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching their grandchildren play. Finally, Beth spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately," she said quietly. "About what happened, about these last 17 years. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to say some things." Michael waited, watching her carefully. He had imagined this conversation many times over the years, but had never expected it to actually happen. "I was wrong," she continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Not just about the affair, but about how I handled everything afterward. I was a coward. I should have fought for us, should have tried harder to show you that what we had was worth saving. Instead, I just accepted your decision and let you go." She paused, struggling with her emotions. "I know it's probably too late, and I know I hurt you terribly. But Michael, I never stopped loving you. Not for one day in 17 years. What I did was inexcusable, and I've regretted it every single day since." Michael felt something stirring inside him that he had suppressed for years. "Beth, please let me finish," she said urgently. "I know we can't go back to what we were. We're different people now. But maybe we could try to be friends again? I miss talking to you. I miss your laugh, your terrible jokes, the way you always knew what to say when I was worried about something." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm retiring next year, and the thought of spending those years alone, especially knowing that you're alone too, just seems like such a waste. We were best friends once, before we were anything else. Maybe we could find our way back to that." Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had said. He thought about his conversation with Catherine Coleman, an old friend who had divorced and remarried her ex-husband after 5 years apart. "It's not that simple, Beth," he said finally. "I'm not the same person I was 17 years ago. I've built a life without you. I've learned to be alone." "I know," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to be who you were. I'm asking if you could consider getting to know who I am now, and maybe let me get to know who you've become." Michael looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. He saw the same woman he had fallen in love with 40 years ago, but also someone who had been marked by time and experience, just as he had been. "What are you proposing exactly?" he asked. "Maybe we could start with lunch?" she suggested tentatively. "Just as friends. Maybe once a month or so. No pressure, no expectations beyond just spending time together." Michael considered this. The rational part of his mind listed all the reasons why it was a bad idea. But another part of him, a part he had thought was dead, was responding to the possibility of having his oldest friend back in his life. "I need time to think about it," he said. "Of course," Beth replied quickly. "I don't expect an answer now. But Michael, if you decide you're willing to try, even just a little bit, it would mean everything to me." They walked back to the party in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon watching Beth interact with their children and grandchildren, seeing her in a new light. She was still the same person who had raised Jessica with him, who had supported his career, who had been his partner in creating the life they had built together. 2 weeks later, Michael called Beth and asked if she would like to have lunch. They met at a small restaurant in downtown Denver, both nervous and uncertain. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually they found their rhythm. They talked about their work, their children, their grandchildren. They carefully avoided the past, focusing instead on the present. It was the first of many lunches. Gradually, they began to talk more openly about what had happened, about the pain they had both carried, about the loneliness of the intervening years. Beth never made excuses for what she had done, never tried to minimize the damage she had caused. She simply acknowledged it and expressed her genuine remorse. Michael found himself slowly letting down his guard. The trust would never be the same, he knew that. But perhaps they could build something new, something different but still valuable. The months passed, and their friendship deepened. They began to spend more time together. Occasional dinners, visits to art galleries, even a weekend trip to Santa Fe where they stayed in separate rooms but enjoyed each other's company in a way they hadn't in decades. Michael realized that what they were building wasn't a restoration of their old marriage. It was something entirely new. A friendship between two people who had known each other for most of their adult lives, who had made terrible mistakes and learned from them, who were approaching the final chapters of their lives with a clearer understanding of what really mattered. It was Catherine Coleman who had shown him that it was possible. Catherine and her husband Robert had divorced after a bitter affair, lived apart for 5 years, then gradually found their way back to each other, not as the people they had been, but as the people they had become. The thing about second chances, Catherine had told him over coffee one afternoon, is that they're not about going backward. They're about going forward with all the wisdom you've gained along the way. A year after that first lunch, Beth mentioned that she had always wanted to travel to Rome. "I've always wanted to throw a coin in the Trevi fountain," she said. "Make a wish for a second chance." Michael looked at her across the table, both thinking the same thing but neither quite ready to say it. "Maybe we could go together," he said finally. "As friends." "I'd like that," she replied, smiling. 2 years after that first lunch, they stood together at the edge of the Trevi Fountain in Rome. The late afternoon sun cast golden light on the Baroque sculptures, and tourists crowded around them, all participating in the ancient ritual of tossing coins over their shoulders. Beth held a coin in her hand, hesitating. "What should I wish for?" she asked. Michael smiled, surprising himself with how natural it felt. "I think you should wish for whatever will make you happiest." She closed her eyes, made her wish, and tossed the coin into the fountain. Then she pulled out her phone. "Would you mind taking a picture with me? I'd like to send it to Jessica." They stood together in front of the fountain, not quite touching but closer than they had been in 20 years. Michael put his arm around Beth's shoulders, and she leaned into him slightly. It felt comfortable, familiar, and entirely new all at the same time. Later that evening, as they sat at a small restaurant near the Pantheon, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their plans for the next day, Michael realized that he was genuinely happy for the first time in years. Not the contentment he had learned to settle for, but actual happiness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had tried this earlier?" Beth asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "Sometimes," Michael admitted, "but I think we needed those years apart. We needed to become the people we are now before we could appreciate what we have." Beth nodded, understanding. "I just don't want to waste any more time." "Neither do I," Michael agreed. They had learned that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt exactly as they were. But sometimes, if you're patient and willing to do the work, you can build a new bridge, one that's perhaps stronger for having acknowledged the chasm it spans. Back in Denver, Catherine Coleman sat in her kitchen reading an email from Michael. The message was brief but included a photo, Michael and Beth smiling in front of the Trevi Fountain, looking relaxed and genuinely happy. Catherine showed the photo to her husband Robert. "Look at this," she said, grinning. "They finally figured it out." Robert leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen. "Good for them," he said warmly. "It's never too late to find your way back to each other." Catherine nodded, thinking about their own journey back to each other after their divorce years earlier. "You know what I love about this photo?" "What's that?" They both look like themselves again. Not the people they were trying to be for 17 years, but who they really are. Robert squeezed her shoulder. "That's the thing about second chances," he said. "They're not about going backward. They're about going forward with all the wisdom you've gained along the way." Catherine closed the laptop and reached for Robert's hand. After all these years, she still felt grateful every day for their decision to try again, to build something new from the ruins of what they had lost. In Rome, Michael and Beth walked slowly back to their hotel through the ancient streets, talking quietly about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. They had learned that love isn't just about passion and romance. Sometimes it's about choosing to show up, to do the work, to believe that two imperfect people can create something beautiful together if they're willing to be honest about their failures and brave enough to try again. The coin Beth had thrown into the fountain carried a simple wish, for the courage to keep trying, to keep building this new thing between them, one day at a time. As they walked through the eternal city, surrounded by monuments to human persistence and the power of rebuilding, they both felt the quiet satisfaction of people who had found their way home to each other, not as the people they used to be, but as the people they had become. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.